Well, it is true that Mike and Sean are working extremely hard for you guys. When they say they're working hard for you guys, I promise you behind the scenes that's actually happening. And today we're going to talk about a topic that I don't know that we certainly amongst ourselves talk too much about, but I bet you think about it. We're going to talk about the conversations that take place once we've all left the room as a sales and marketing professional. And what's going on behind the scenes. We're going to also talk about, to some degree, what led up to that. And I'm certainly going to spend some time talking about what we can do on the front end to minimize those conversations that take place after we leave. Because the truth of the matter is, in many cases, you don't want to be a part of those conversations that are happening after we leave. We're going to dig into that. And again, it's a question I hope you ask yourself sometimes. A young lady I was speaking to earlier said, I often think about that when I leave. Wow, did they like me? Did what I said make sense? I didn't get this question or that question. And I do want to say this. We're going to look at a narrow scope. We've got a few minutes or 20 or so minutes here to talk. And so I'm not going to be able to dig into a lot of areas. So I'm going to have to stay at maybe a 30,000-foot view on some of these topics. But I want to start out with a story real quick to put this in perspective as we kind of dig into what you guys should know about what's being said about us after we left the room. First thing I want to talk about is, to put this in perspective, is early in my career, I'd invented a product that was eventually funded from a venture capital firm for $4 million. And it was an exciting story. I had some customers that had a great deal of belief in the product, so much so that they referred me to their customers. And one of my particular customers referred me the chief marketing officer of Pepsi. And that trip was set up, and I flew up to meet with this gentleman. And I'm never going to forget that trip because, as you can imagine, I was filled with excitement. I had my presentation ready. I had all my I's dotted and T's crossed, as we say. And as I arrived at the Pepsi campus, it was quite the experience going through all the levels of security to get behind the scenes and ultimately making it to the chief marketing officer's office. And once I arrived there, I was introduced to Randy, the chief marketing officer, and the meeting lasted for about 20 minutes. The first 18 minutes of that meeting really felt like I was in hand-to-hand combat, or I was sent into combat, maybe I should say, without a weapon. Because it was a barrage of questions. I mean, I could not string two sentences together. Tell me about this. How did you get here? Remind me of what this is about. What's going on? BlackBerry, back from the BlackBerry. And this went on literally for 18 of the 20 minutes, just listening to endless comments and questions. And every time I would, no, I couldn't get a word in. And we've all experienced that as sales and marketing professionals. And so, as that happened, or as that process unfolded, we really got to a point in the meeting, the last couple minutes, where I kind of felt like he had this summation conclusion where he said, Scott, I'm just not sure I get it. I'm not sure I like it. I'm not sure how it will fit. I don't see the ROI. We only do things here at Pepsi if we have a return on investment. So even though I couldn't string two sentences together, I know we all know this. We feel that pressure where we feel like the meeting's about to end. And I had that voice inside my head say, don't let him get away with it. And that's not necessarily the voice that you want to have, but I responded to that. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, by the way, the voice we have in our head? Well, that voice also said, do something. And in the last 2 minutes, my pride went on the offensive, and I began with an interruption as Randy was talking. And again, last 2 minutes he's talking, and I leaned over in the chair and I said, Randy. And he kept talking. I said, Randy. And he goes, yes. I said, listen, you keep saying that it's about a return on investment, that I don't have one. What is this cardboard cutout, life-size cardboard cutout of a wrapper here in your office that you tell me is in stores all across the United States of America? What's the return on investment in that? Can I apply that to my product? He was silent. I said, you keep talking about I this and I that. I mean, isn't this about the customer? I mean, Pepsi's customer? It's not about you, Randy. Now he was glaringly silent. Now, the voice over my head on this side said, yes, I got his attention now. Now, the voice over here on this side of my head said, oh, you got his attention all right. That wasn't a good decision, Scott. Now, I know you guys, we all know that was a big mistake. That was a big mistake. So yes, Randy's response was a glaring silence. And then came the polite signal that we all know when the meeting's over with. Does anybody know what that polite signal is? The standing up. Randy stood up. He extended his hand. He said, thank you for coming in. I think we'll pass on the opportunity right now. Good luck to you, son. And so that was my 20 minutes with Pepsi. And so I just start this out with that story, a personal reflection, because I want you to think about this real quick. I did everything right, and my team did everything right to get to the dance with the CMO of Pepsi in Purchase, New York, global corporate headquarters. Okay? And my pride got in the way. My personality got in the way. We're going to talk about, I'm going to come back to that story in a few minutes, but I wanted to set the stage to put this in perspective. What are we talking about? And it could be a small presentation, big. I'm just using one that's a little dramatic, okay? So let's move from the abstract to some specifics and really want to answer the question that we started this presentation with what are our customers talking about after they leave? And it really boils down to a simple sentence. One could argue a lot of different things, but it really boils down to this. They're talking about your relationship shortcomings, the whole process that led you up to that point. A lot of the conversation that takes place afterwards are your relationship shortcomings, any offenses that took place, sometimes your strengths, and basically your overall ability or lack thereof to build a relationship with them based on trust. Well, the conversations revolve around that. We're going to dig into that. And I just want you to keep in mind as I walk through this section, we're not going to talk about the glossy brochures and all the things that led up to it. We're going to really talk about, to some degree, the end result of things that happened after we've left the room. And we're really going to spend more time talking about the negative, not the positive, because if we can solve the negative, what should happen? Our sales should go up, right? If the positive's happening, we don't need to talk about it. So I just want to remind everybody of that we're going to talk about that as we go into it. If I could sum it up, I would say that when we talk about shortcomings, I'm going to break this into sections. The shortcomings I'm referring to are really our personal unintended consequences to both indirectly and indirectly with the people that we're talking about, the behavior quirks. And I'll just cite some examples here to maybe give us something to chew on a little bit. I was recently with a client, and he and I were sitting through a final presentation by a group of people, and it was regarding some supply chain issues and what their solutions were going to be. And last gentleman left. We've been doing this all morning. It was 2 presentations we sat through. Last gentleman left. Door shut, and maybe 10 or 15 seconds went by, and he looked at me and said, what do you think? And I said, you're the boss. Tell me what you think, And so he smiled, and he said, well, I'll tell you what I think. Did you hear that last guy? It was all about I did this, I did that, we're about this, this is our qualifications, we've been here, we have these clients, we go there. Not one time did that man tell me how he was going to solve our problem, how it was going to benefit my company. That was the first thing he said after that gentleman, well, the second thing he said, first thing he says, what do I think? But the second thing he said was that those string of questions about the gentleman's entire presentation. Right? Now, I didn't talk to this gentleman after he left, but I'm sure he left with his peacock feathers spread out a little bit, that he felt good because most of the presentation was about him and his company. And those were some impressive statistics. But what that ultimately led to was behind the scenes, the conversation ended up being about him, not about the solution. Needless to say, he didn't get the business. Okay? Second example was with a bank loan officer, and we were riding back from a luncheon that we had with a business owner that was possibly going to become a potential client. We get in the car and small talked about a couple of things. And I guess when there was a break in the conversation, he said, "Did you see how he was dressed?" And I was kind of taken aback for a moment, and I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "He looked like he rolled out of bed." And I said, honestly, I really wasn't paying that much attention to it. I was listening to what he was talking about with regard to the financing. And he goes, "Yeah, but his shirt was all wrinkled. There was a tear in the hem of his coat. He had a big stain on his tie." Something as simple as how the gentleman dressed, that's what the entire conversation revolved around, not about his need for some debt financing for his company and how the restructuring was going to help us. That wasn't the focus. It was on something absolutely inconsequential, was how he dressed and how he looked. And so some of these things we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about, I hope they come across as petty and trivial, because believe it or not, behind the scenes after we leave, unfortunately, that's what some of the conversations are petty and trivial, because our personality quirks or things that we think are okay show up afterwards. Another example that came to mind as I was working on this, I was sitting in what was an ad hoc committee meeting as an advisor. It was regarding an $11 million building project, and the architectural firms had been in giving their presentations. One particular presentation, at least it seemed like every third paragraph, there was a negative comment made about the competitive quote or company that was providing the competitive quote. It did not come across as funny, but after the architectural firm finished their presentation, we had one in the morning, one in the afternoon. After they finished their presentation and they left, there were 12 people sitting in the room, and 40% of the conversation at least, or 50% of the conversation that took place about their proposal was not about their design features, their cost-saving, their energy-saving, none of their innovation was discussed. Most of it was surrounded around the negative comments that they made about the competitor, okay? And they just berated them for it. It took one person in that group setting to throw out a negative, and everybody in the room said, "Oh yeah, I heard it." Turned into a feeding frenzy. So why do these conversations take place after we've left the room? Well, it's because we don't do a great job of managing relationships, okay? And when we leave the room, and I want to leave this to a marketing team example here. We had a marketing team that went through a rebranding proposal with the senior management team. I remember being really excited about this because I really love some of the aspects of marketing and how it influences behavior and how we're able to communicate messages. And during that presentation, there were two marketing team members, and during that presentation, they thought it would be fun to use political humor, current day political humor, to make their sales points to the audience that was sitting in the room with regard to rebranding. The topic was about rebranding, and so they wanted to use current political day events to make light of that. And after they finished their presentation, and again they left the room, and the CEO was sitting there, and man, there was dead silence in the room, and the CEO made a polite little comment, said we won't be doing business with them. And of course, I wasn't privy to the history being in there as an advisor, and I asked a couple of questions, and basically all the people that they were making fun of in their presentation to make their sales points, they were contributors to inside that room. And a multi-million-dollar rebranding project over 3 years just evaporated over a poor choice in humor. Some of these examples I know that maybe we think to ourselves, I would never do that. And maybe you wouldn't, and I know some of these are kind of extreme examples maybe. But believe it or not, as you move through your presentations, all the things that you do to make it to the meeting, there's a tally being taken of your personality quirks that usually end up being talked about after you've left the room. It's an unspoken tally, okay? It could be dress related. There's a long laundry list of things that could be related to. And they always end up in the meeting room. And I mean, I want you to think about that for just one second. How many meetings have we been a part of as individuals or as groups where just one person makes a negative comment and boy, we just run down that negative road as a group. We stay on that road. And unfortunately, in today's society, it's not usual for a counter opinion to the group opinion to stand up and go, listen, I just disagree. Okay? It's not, I'm not telling you it doesn't happen. It certainly does. People have courage to stand up and say, listen, I'm just going to tell all 12 of you you're wrong. This is a good company. We need to look at them. But as a general rule, when things happen behind the scenes after you've left and conducted your final presentation or turned in your final proposal, what happens quite frequently is if it turns negative early, it stays negative. And right or wrong, true or false, those negative comments tend to stick with your proposal, and you end up not getting the business. So I want to talk about, again, a couple of other topics moving forward about being offended. And I want to use the example of everybody is normal until you get to know them, okay? We all think we're normal until we get to know each other, right? What's interesting about that is, as sales and marketing professionals, we take that one step further and we think when we're in a presentation or preparing a presentation, we think that our normal is your normal, and then we respond that way. Okay? We assume. And that's an assumption when we think our normal is your normal. And it's when we do that, when we start treating other people as if our normal is their normal, that's when we start offending people. And it could be, listen, it could be as simple as the way people dress. Again, I've said in meetings before, I'm not picking on the ladies, but I've said in meetings before where there have been women that have eviscerated other women by dressing provocatively from a presentation. I've seen some of the most vicious discussions be about women, attacking other women by how they dressed. In my mind, I'm thinking, can we get back to the proposal? But we were stuck on that topic. For guys, there's been conversations where women have talked about, man, he looked like he just came home from the club. And so, went in casual, not talking about a suit and tie, but came in with their studded jeans and boots and whatever else they had on. And that ended up being the topic of conversation after they left. So we don't want to, I just want to encourage you to not make the assumption that your normal is everybody else's normal. And talk about some other examples here of where offensive has taken place after the fact. Certainly political topics are radioactive. We talked about that earlier. Invading someone's personal space. Personal example, I had a lady come in to make a presentation with me with her team. There were 2 chairs sitting across my desk, maybe 4 feet from the desk. I had my daily work stuff strewn out everywhere. And so she came in and grabbed the chair away from the wall, pulled it up to my desk, moved my papers out of the way, set her presentation down, and pulled the chair up and sat right there in front of me. And man, I was sitting behind my desk, and I was like, wow, that just happened. And twice during the presentation, she got up, walked around the desk to where I was sitting, and was telling me, this is where I'm at right here. And I was looking up, and I was like, get away from me. So that's all I could think of was get away from me. My wife's going to come to the office about the time this happens. So, it's not what it looks like, honey. So, you know what the conversation was after she left. Don't let her come back in here. So, but she did. And so, lack of follow-up. You want to talk about some things that offend people. Lack of follow-up and over-promising and under-delivering. I know you're professionals in this room, but let me tell you, when you're dealing with other professionals, you need to be that professional, because you want to talk about offending somebody. Go in to deal with a professional organization and not be professional. You're going to offend them. And they're going to talk about you're not professional. And that's all they're going to talk about. It's not what you proposed. It's talk about how unprofessional you were. One of my favorite things is come back to this, is pride of ownership. Think about the incident with Pepsi that I described. It was my pride of ownership. After being hammered for 18 minutes, my pride of ownership jumped in there, and I offended the chief marketing officer of Pepsi. And one of my favorites is arrogance as well. You want to offend somebody, you want to hear that conversation take place afterwards about how arrogant they are. I'll share a personal example. I was in the restroom washing my hands, getting ready to meet with a young lady named Barbara, who is the purchasing manager of an organization, and I was drying my hands off, and about that time, here come two guys in suits, high-fiving and talking trash about how they just met with Barbara, and they landed the deal. They know they're going to get the deal, and this is great, and this price and that price, and this is how we're going to get it, and we're going to kill the competitor. Man, they were just going on and on, and I realized in about 15 seconds, they were talking about me. So I started drying my hands real slow then. The machine was on, but my hands weren't underneath the dryer. I wanted to pick up as much scoop of how they were going to shoot me. And so I stayed as long as I could without embarrassing myself and got enough information. And I left the restroom, walked down the hall, went into the meeting with Barbara, signed in, sat down, and I said, "You are never going to believe what I just heard." She said, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, so-and-so and so-and-so said this was going to happen, that was going to happen, and they nailed it, and you didn't see it coming, and this was the price they were going to get, and blah, blah, blah." I used their arrogance as a weapon against them after the fact. Barbara was offended that they said that. Not that I told her. We were in a relationship. She was offended that they would leave and talk about her that way, about what was going to happen. So, in all these different examples, when I talk about what's the conversation, yes, they've been long conversations, there's been short conversations. My point in talking about what's taking place after the fact, what's going on after you leave the room, is really a mirror to what took place the week, the months, the days prior to or leading up to that, right? It's really what I'm talking about, is that you can actually influence the conversations that take place after you leave. See, the sales presentation doesn't stop after you turned in your final proposal. It does for you maybe. But really the conversations start taking place quite significantly about everything that led up to that. And so, again, I'm certainly constantly reminded of that even in my own business. So don't assume that any customer, don't assume with any customer that your normal is their normal. And quite frankly, it's when you make that assumption that likely is going to lead to offending them or one of those shortcomings showing up after you've had that discussion. And so let's change course for a moment, and I want to move to, I guess, kind of away from discussing some of these negative insights. It's kind of weighty to talk about all the negativity, but talk about the solution. And really the solution, it's not going to be something that's unfamiliar to you, but I am going to talk specifically about it, but it is building compelling relationships. And compelling relationships based on trust. And, revisit that story with Pepsi, since we're talking about the compelling relationships, and kind of close the loop on that. A couple of days later, my customer who referred me into Pepsi certainly called me to let me know what he found out behind the scenes. And he did ask me when I answered the phone, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Sure. Give me the beating, I'll take it." He said, "Scott, obviously you're not going to be doing any business with Pepsi." He said, "But this is what you need to know. At that level, everybody they meet with, it was intentional that they put you through the grinder that way because they're trying to establish one of two things. All right? Are you there because you just want to sell a whole bunch of product to Pepsi, or are you there because you believe so much in what you're doing is going to help that company?" I think I sent the wrong signal. I was there for myself. Does that make sense? Had I had a different mindset going in, I would have been impacting the relationship side. And I'm telling you, the truth is, my mindset was, I'm going to Pepsi, I'm going to hit the Grand Slam, my presentation looks good, I had it all figured out and burnt that house down. So, success, by the way, is the worst teacher in the world, right? Failures are where our best lessons come from. So that's closing the loop, on the Pepsi story, and obviously that never changed with Pepsi. It always stayed that way. There was no recovering that. But I want to ask you this question: can you think of a national indicator that measures men's and women's ability to develop and maintain long-term relationships? Anybody guess? You hit it. Marriage. According to the the U.S. Census Department, 50% of all, where we are current day, 50% of all first marriages fail. 63 to 67% of second marriages fail, and up as high as 74 to 77% of third marriages. If that's our failure rate, where there's a commitment, finances, among other things involved, what is our commitment to relationships where it's to some degree disposable? We don't like them, we don't have to go in. I mean, this is where it shows up at, using that statistic. And really my point in using that is just to make a point that we struggle with relationships. It shows up in those conversations after we leave the room. And I think to some degree it shows up with how we interact with our family members. In my family, if we're not making fun of you, we don't love you. And so it may be that way for you guys as well. And we use the quirks and personality traits that show up in our family and make fun of each other. But unfortunately, on the business side, it's those quirks and personality traits that if we don't have a relationship, they end up being our Achilles heel when it gets to a conversation behind the scenes. So when we remove that trust and relationship, everything falls apart. But here's the most important fact that I want to, I guess, put a bow tie on for you guys, is that regardless of whether you have an outgoing, bubbly personality or you struggle with relationships, or maybe you don't feel like you're a strong communicator, whatever you feel like your shortcomings are, all the way through the introduction leading up to when you do your final presentation, the bottom line is this: the better your relationships, the more you're going to be defended when you're absent. Okay? That's how you overcome it. Because I know to some degree, as I'm talking about all this, I know we listen to speakers and we self-reflect and we self-assess. Don't get weighed down by that. Because really, yes, it's difficult at relationships and we're sloppy at it. All of us are, okay? But the better you are at the relationships, all of your shortcomings that we all have, okay, are minimized, and you will be defended much more strongly when you're not in the room. And let me tell you something. If you hear anything from me today, if you want to increase your sales, you build those relationships. I'm taking the assumption I've got check marks in all the other boxes. Y'all have a competitive price. Y'all have a glossy brochure. Y'all have a website. I'm check marking all those boxes and saying we all made it to the table. We've all submitted our final proposal. What's going to win it? It's going to be my relationship. What's going to solve all those? There's always a negative Nelly in the room, okay? I call them snipers. There's always a sniper in the room when you're doing a presentation that wants to take shots at you. And so the relationships are what solve those. I want to tell you another story here for a moment about how this relationship side really played it out behind the scenes early in my career. I graduated from Arkansas State University across the river over in Jonesboro, and with a finance degree, and began my career actually immediately out of college managing a medical sales territory for hospitals in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So quite a transition there. There's a whole other story there. It did not take me long to get to Dallas-Fort Worth and start managing that territory with hospitals and get myself absolutely overwhelmed. Finance degree, medical sales, sterile procedure, balance sheets. Okay, it was a mess. Traveling, it was just a mess. And so the conversations that were taking place after I was leaving were not good. My district manager knew about it. Everybody, the hospitals knew about it. Okay? Conversations weren't good. In that being overwhelmed, I had to make a decision. It was really where I personally feel like I've kind of figured this out for myself. Is what am I going to do to change the conversation that's happening after I leave, because this is not working. And I'm going to tell you, I fundamentally made a decision then that what I was going to do was minimize myself, make myself a smaller target by not talking about myself. And I was going to maximize making sure that every conversation I had was about my customer and how I was going to help them reach their goal, period. Okay? And it was a radical, abrupt change. It was a noticeable, radical, abrupt change. And let me tell you what I got for that investment. What I got for that investment, but what I'm describing, by the way, took place over the first probably 60 days or so of being in the territory. But what I got from that investment was that not only did my actions change, but the conversations changed around the hospital, But that territory that I inherited, that they put me in, was one of the worst performing, bottom 10% performing territories in the entire United States of 132, I think it was. But 18 months later, that territory was in the top 20% because sales were coming in because it was all about them and their relationship. I ended up being asked to become one of the small group of people that was on the national training side for all new sales reps that came in the company. Had to come through one of them, or the southeastern part had to come through my territory. Now, I'd like to attribute that to a lot of things, but I'm telling you, it wasn't the glossy brochures. We had to have that. We had to have the product line. We had to have all those things, right? But what made it happen was when I changed the conversation and minimized myself and maximized my emphasis on the customer. And it did change the conversations behind the scene, and it changed the conversations this way. Instead of, Scott's not doing this proposal's not right, this isn't here on time, when those conversations stopped, and the conversations that started being had behind the scenes because they were shared with me were, wow, this guy is doing exactly what he said he's going to do when he said he's going to do it. This guy has told me 100 times that if he can't get it done, he'll go find somebody in the company that will do it. You know, I mean, it's this radical change in how that happened. And so, basically, you know, the point that I'm really trying to drive home is that when we get our relationship right, we directly influence that conversation that takes place after the scenes or after the fact, and relationships minimize, you know, our personality. They minimize our personality. And to some degree, I know I'm going against the grain here because isn't it all about us today? It's all about me, right? So I'm telling you the exact opposite. It's not. But I do want this to resonate with you today because if we can change the conversation taking place after we leave or after you leave here, it is going to make an impact. It is going to change how you're doing. It's not a quick fix. It is an investment. And you're not going to see results in necessarily 15 days. It's not a 7-step process. I'm not a big fan of 7-step processes. But let me just close really on this note. And this is an addition to what I would normally put in this section, but it just happened last week, and I wanted to share it with you guys because of what this organization represents. And last week, I was sitting with a divisional president of a Fortune 100 company here in the United States. And I was sitting across the desk from him, and he was just talking in generalities about the business and some of the things that frustrate him and he deals with. And I don't know, 2/3 of the way through the conversation, he looked at me, and knowing my background, because he and I have known each other for quite a while, he looked at me and he says, you know what, Scott? I'm just at a point now where, and I'm going to read this quote. He says, nobody cares about relationships anymore. They just want the best price and for the sales guy to go away and the marketing people to shut up. I don't know what my facial expression was, but I don't think I could hide it very well because I was actually deeply disappointed to hear him say that. Because I totally and absolutely fundamentally disagree with that. I hope you do too, because it's just not true. The fact of the matter is that we're all starving for real relationships. That's a fact. Okay? It's a fact. It's not about tweet me this, Facebook me that. I was in a cafe the other day. You know what it said on the front of the chalkboard of the cafe? I've never seen this before in my life. It says, we don't have wireless internet, talk to each other. I took a picture of it. This is great. You know? Do I? Yeah. I should have asked anyway, right? I can't log on. So, but anyway, that's really where we are. Is talk to each other. Have a relationship. Invest in that. You're going to find that these conversations are real that are taking place after we leave, even when it's going to happen today when we leave. You guys are going to be talking about what I'm saying. Okay? It's happening. It's real. You can't ignore it. It is an 800-pound or 1,500-pound gorilla in the room, and it's biting you, and you're not maybe addressing it. And how do you address it? There's only one true solution, and that's address the relationship. Have a conversation. Be authentic. That's the bottom line, okay? So, I know, again, I was born out in the field. My first job was in the field, and we do an exceptional job as salespeople being hunter-gatherers, okay? We do an exceptional job. We also know that we often become our own and the company we work for occasionally, we become our own worst enemy. And so my hope today, and I know this isn't a topic that we talk about, but my hope today is as I've hit these different highlights, is that you'll leave, and in some manner you'll refocus whatever you're working on. I don't mean completely. I don't care if it's 3 degrees. That adds up over time. But my hope is you'll refocus with the people that you're working with internally in your organization and externally and invest in the relationship. And if you do that, then all of those tactics that you deployed to get you to the table, to get you to the dance, okay? Well, you'll change the conversation. And at the end of the day, you'll win because you invested in that relationship. All right, I appreciate y'all letting me come talk to you. All right, thank you very much.